Sick and helpless, my husband left me at a remote ranch on his mother's orders. Then everything changed.
I never thought I'd be telling this story. To be honest, even now when I close my eyes and remember what happened, a part of me still wonders if it was all some terrible dream. But it wasn't. It was real. It was my life, and it nearly destroyed me. My name is Alec Rose, and I was abandoned in the most shocking and cruel way imaginable. By the very person who swore to love me, my husband. And it wasn't even his idea. No, it was his mother's command. Her hatred of me was so deep, so venomous, that she convinced him to leave me sick, helpless, and utterly alone in the middle of nowhere. But before I tell you how I ended up stranded in that forgotten place, you need to understand what my life looked like before everything fell apart. At first, it seemed normal enough. I wasn't living a fairy tale, but I had stability, or at least I thought I did. My husband and I had a home, a life that from the outside looked fine, maybe even happy. I worked, I cooked, I laughed when I could. I dreamed of the future like anyone would, of building a family, of creating something together that felt safe and lasting. But there were cracks in the picture I tried so hard to hold together. My husband was often distant. He shut me out in ways I didn't want to admit. His eyes would wander, his voice would go cold, and sometimes when I needed comfort, he would vanish into silence. I told myself it was just stress, that work was weighing on him, that life had hardened his heart temporarily. I wanted so badly to believe that love would win if I just waited long enough, if I was patient enough. And then there was his mother. From the moment we met, I felt it. The disapproval, the judgment. It was like every time she looked at me, she saw something she needed to remove. I could be polite, respectful, even generous, but nothing was ever enough. To her, I was wrong. Wrong for her son, wrong for our family. Wrong in ways I couldn't change no matter how hard I tried. She smiled in public, yes, but behind closed doors her words carried poison. Quiet jabs, subtle cuts, whispers that burned long after she walked away. I felt it. I knew she didn't want me around. But I kept hoping that, over time, things would soften. That maybe one day she would see the love I had for her son, the loyalty I gave, the sacrifices I made. I thought if I just kept trying, she would accept me. But instead, her power over him only grew stronger. And I was blind to how dangerous that power really was. Then came the illness. It started small, fatigue, a cough that lingered, a body that felt heavier each day. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself I just needed rest, that it would pass. But it didn't. It grew worse. Soon I couldn't get out of bed without trembling. The nights became endless battles with pain, fever, and weakness. My body betrayed me, and for the first time in my life, I was truly helpless. And that's when I needed him most. My husband. The man I believed would care for me. The one who promised to stand beside me through sickness and health. But instead of compassion, I met distance. He became colder, more detached, as if my illness was an inconvenience, a weight too heavy for him to carry. He stopped checking on me, stopped asking how I was. Sometimes he would disappear for hours, even days, leaving me to fight through the pain alone. I tried to ignore the growing dread in my chest, the feeling that something was slipping beyond my control. But I couldn't ignore the look in his eyes after he spoke with his mother. I saw it, the hardening, the guilt, the way he avoided me like I was already gone. And deep down, though I didn't want to admit it, I knew something terrible was coming. Then one morning, he told me we were leaving. He said I needed fresh air, that a quiet place would help me heal. His words sounded kind, but his voice trembled as he spoke. I wanted so desperately to believe him, to believe this was a gesture of love. So I agreed, even though fear prickled at my skin. We drove for hours. Endless roads stretched before us, empty fields rolling by like a blur. My head throbbed, my chest ached, and I stared out the window in silence, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. He didn't speak. He didn't comfort me. He just drove, his hands gripping the wheel as if he was carrying out a duty he couldn't escape. When we finally stopped, I looked out and saw it. A ranch. Remote. Weathered. Surrounded by nothing but miles of emptiness. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. My heart sank, but I told myself maybe this was just temporary. Maybe this was a place to rest. Maybe he had a plan. But then I saw his eyes. Cold. Empty. And that's when the truth began to sink in. I wasn't brought here to heal. I was brought here to be left behind. And when he turned and walked away, leaving me sick, weak, and alone in that hollow place, the reality hit me with such force it stole the breath from my lungs. The man I trusted, the man I loved, had abandoned me on his mother's orders. And that was only the beginning. When the sound of his car faded into the distance, I sat there frozen, staring at the door he had closed behind him. For a long moment, I couldn't even move. My body was too weak, but even more than that, my heart couldn't understand what had just happened. I kept thinking, he'll be back. He has to come back. I waited. An hour. 2. The light shifted across the dusty floorboards as the sun dropped lower in the sky. My breaths grew shallow, the silence around me pressing down like a heavy weight. And then it hit me in a way I couldn't deny anymore. He wasn't coming back. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever. That realization shattered something inside me. My chest tightened, and tears spilled down my face as I whispered to myself. He left me. The words tasted bitter, like poison. I had been discarded, not by fate, not by strangers, but by my own husband, the man who vowed to protect me, and all because his mother wanted me gone. The nights that followed were unbearable. The ranch creaked and groaned as the wind whipped through broken shutters, every sound magnified in the silence. My body burned with fever, my head heavy, and yet sleep never came easy. I would drift in and out, startled awake by nightmares that weren't even as cruel as reality. In the daylight, I tried to gather myself. I shuffled through the rooms, each one more empty than the last. The place smelled of dust and rot, and the floors were cold against my bare feet. There was no food left behind, no medicine, nothing to suggest that anyone expected me to survive here. That was when I understood the depth of the betrayal. This wasn't negligence. It was intent. I was meant to disappear here. I couldn't stop thinking about her. His mother. I remembered the way she looked at me in the past, her eyes sharp with quiet hatred. I remembered the sly remarks, the moments she made me feel like I was an outsider in my own marriage. And now, here I was, exactly where she wanted me. Removed, erased, silenced. But as the days blurred together, I also thought of him, the man I had loved. I pictured his face the night he dropped me here, how he wouldn't meet my eyes. Did he feel guilt? Did he regret it even for a second? Or had he chosen her completely, leaving me to fade away in the middle of nowhere without a thought? The anger started small, like a spark deep in my chest, but it grew with every hour I lay there, fighting to breathe, fighting to live. I was broken, yes, but not gone. I still had a voice, even if no one could hear it in that empty place. And I swore to myself, if I ever made it out, the world would know what they had done to me. Then, one night, something happened that shifted everything. The wind outside was strong, rattling the windows, howling like it wanted to tear the house apart. I was half awake when I saw them, headlights cutting through the darkness. My heart leapt into my throat. Could it be him? Had he finally come back for me? I dragged myself to the window, my body screaming with pain, and watched as a car pulled slowly into the yard. The door opened, and my breath caught in my chest. It wasn't him. It was her. Ours. Her steps steady, deliberate. When she pushed open the door, her eyes found me immediately. There was no pity, no regret, just cold satisfaction. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice calm, almost casual, as though she were stating a fact. "You never did." I tried to speak, but my voice cracked, my body too weak to hold me upright. I wanted to beg, to ask why, to scream at her for what she had done, but I couldn't. My breath came shallow, my hands trembling. She walked closer, her heels echoing on the wooden floor. She looked down at me like I was already gone, like I was less than human. Her words cut deeper than the illness eating at my bod. "He doesn't need you. You were a mistake, and mistakes get erased." Her gaze lingered, sharp and unrelenting, before she finally turned to leave. The door creaked shut, and I was left staring at the space where she had stood, my body shaking with rage and fear. That night, something inside me changed. I knew then that this was never about sickness, never about care. This was about destruction. She wanted me erased from her son's life, erased from the world if that's what it took. And as much as my body wanted to collapse and give in, my spirit hardened. If this was her plan, if this was what she thought would break me, then she didn't know who I was. I would not vanish quietly, but I also knew this was only the beginning, because something darker was waiting in that silence, something I hadn't yet uncovered, and when I did, it would change everything. The night after she left was the longest of my life. I lay there in the suffocating dark, every sound of the old ranch clawing at my nerves. The walls groaned, the shutters slammed in the wind. My body shook with fever, but what rattled me most wasn't the sickness. It was her words. "You don't belong here. You never did." Those words echoed in my head like a curse, louder than the storm outside. I curled up on the cold floor, shivering, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break free from my chest. For hours I couldn't stop replaying the look on her face, the satisfaction, the finality, as though she had written me off from existence. And maybe, in her eyes, she had. When the morning light finally bled through the cracks of the wooden walls, I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled beneath me, my body begging me to lie back down. But something stronger than weakness drove me forward. I stumbled through the house, searching for food, for water, for anything that might give me strength. All I found were cobwebs, dust, and empty cupboards. It became painfully clear that this wasn't an accident. They hadn't left me here to rest. They had left me here to fade away. For the first time, I felt a new kind of fear, the kind that claws at your soul, the kind that whispers, maybe they really want you dead. Days blurred together. My throat ached with thirst, My stomach twisted in pain, and every breath rattled like a warning. I felt like a ghost trapped in a body that was already breaking apart. But even as my strength drained, a fire burned deep inside me. Rage. It grew every time I thought of him. My husband. The man who stood before me and promised love, loyalty, forever. The man who had once held my hand when I was afraid, who whispered vows beneath the same sky we both believed in. He left me here like I was nothing, like I was disposable, and all because his mother told him to. I thought of her too, her sharp eyes, her venomous tongue. She had won. She had pulled the strings and turned him into her puppet. But as much as she wanted me erased, I swore to myself, even in that desolate house, that she would not succeed. Then came the night that changed everything. I had just drifted into a shallow, feverish sleep when a sound jolted me awake, a car engine rumbling in the distance. My heart leapt and then pounded in panic. Was it her again? Or him? Or someone else entirely? I dragged myself to the window and peered through the dusty glass. Headlights cut across the empty yard, slow, deliberate, until they stopped just outside. My hands trembled as I clutched the wall for balance, every nerve screaming that something was wrong. The door creaked open, and footsteps crunched across the dirt. The air grew heavy, my chest tightening as I strained to listen. Then the front door groaned, and the silhouette stepped inside. It was her, again. But this time, she wasn't alone. A tall man followed her in, his face shadowed in the dim light. He didn't look at me the way she did, cold and cruel, but his presence sent chills down my spine. He stood, silently behind her, as though waiting for instruction. She stepped closer, her lips curling in that same bitter smile. "Still alive," she muttered, almost surprised. "You're stronger than I thought, but not strong enough." Her companion shifted, his eyes flicking toward me. I couldn't read his expression, but I felt the weight of his stare. For a moment, I thought he might speak, maybe even help me. But he didn't. He stood there like a shadow, silent, complicit. She crouched down beside me, her perfume sharp in the stale air. Her words dripped like venom. "Do you understand now? He chose me. He always will. You were nothing but a mistake, and mistakes don't get second chances." I wanted to scream, to tell her she was wrong, but my voice cracked, my throat too dry, too weak. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at her, hating every breath she took. And then, just as quickly as they had come, they were gone. The man followed her out the door, their car engine roaring back to life before fading into the night. I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling violently. My breaths came in shallow gasps, my mind spiraling with fear. That wasn't a visit. That was a warning, a threat. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about abandonment. It was about erasure. They wanted me gone, completely. The weight of that truth crushed me. I curled into myself, clutching my chest, my tears soaking the floor beneath me. I thought of the world outside, of the people living their normal lives while I withered away in silence. And I thought of how easily a person could vanish when someone else decided they didn't matter. But in that moment of despair, something inside me shifted. Beneath the fear, beneath the sickness, a surge of defiance pulsed through me. If they thought I would die here quietly, they were wrong. If they thought they could erase me, They underestimated me. My body was weak, but my spirit was on fire. And I swore, as the darkness swallowed me that night, that I would not let them finish me. Because I was not nothing. I was still here. And somehow, I was going to make the world hear my story. After that night, after she stood over me like a vulture circling its prey, something inside me snapped. I couldn't lie there anymore waiting for death. I couldn't let their plan succeed. I had been sick, yes. I had been abandoned, yes. But I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, I had a choice. To wither away or to fight. I dragged myself across the cold floor, every movement scraping against pain, but I refused to stop. My body felt like it was made of lead, my lungs burning, but I searched the house again, desperately this time, checking corners I had overlooked, prying open drawers swollen with age. Finally, in the back of a cabinet, I found it. A half-empty bottle of water and a stale piece of bread. It wasn't much, but to me, it was salvation. I drank slowly, forcing the water past my parched throat, and nibbled at the bread like it was a feast. Strength trickled back into me, not enough to stand fully, but enough to spark hope. And hope, in that moment, was more powerful than any medicine. Days passed, and I started to push myself. First crawling, then standing for brief moments, gripping the walls to keep from collapsing. My body screamed at me, but my heart drove me forward. I wasn't just surviving for myself anymore. I was surviving to spite them. Every breath I took was proof that they hadn't erased me. But survival didn't quiet the questions. Why? Why had he done this? Why had she hated me enough to see me suffer like this? And the darker question, the one that haunted me at night, if I hadn't gotten sick, would he have left me anyway? Or was my weakness the excuse they had been waiting for? The thought burned me alive inside. Then one morning, I woke to silence so deep it felt unnatural. No wind, no creaking wood, nothing. Just stillness. I sat there, my heart pounding. And that's what. And I realized how fragile I truly was. If something happened, if I fell, if I collapsed, if I lost consciousness, no one would come. No one would even know I was gone. The loneliness cut sharper than any blade. I thought of the world beyond the fields. People walking in crowded streets, families eating together, children laughing. And then there was me, rotting away in a place no one remembered. It was in that crushing silence that I finally understood. This was what injustice felt like. Not just betrayal, not just abandonment, but being erased from the story of life itself. And it wasn't just me. My story was personal, yes, but it was also part of something bigger, something darker, that stretched far beyond my own suffering. Because history is full of people who have been silenced, discarded, and forgotten. People stripped of their worth because of who they were, what they looked like, or simply because they didn't fit someone else's idea of belonging. I was living my own version of that injustice. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't last forever. Even in the quietest, most forgotten places, voices find ways to rise. And in that ranch, on those nights when the fever broke and the tears dried, I found my own voice. I began to whisper to myself, telling my story out loud, as if speaking it into the darkness would keep me alive. I said my name over and over. Alec Rose. I'm still here. I'm still alive. It became my mantra, my defiance. The more I spoke it, the stronger I felt. My body was fragile, but my mind was sharpening. I started to picture what I would say if I ever made it out, how I would tell the world what they had done, how I would make sure that, no matter how much she wanted me erased, my story would live. And that fire, it kept me alive. I don't remember every detail of those final days in the ranch. Much of it is a blur of pain, sweat, and trembling hands clawing for survival. But I remember the moment I stood up without collapsing. I remember the moment I walked to the door, pushed it open, and felt the cold air, both physically and emotionally. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The first time I walked into a store, surrounded by strangers who had no idea what I had been through, I felt invisible, but in a different way. Invisible not because I was erased, but because my pain was hidden beneath skin and silence. And that's when I realized, there are so many people walking around like me, carrying invisible scars from things the world will never see. That truth broke me, and it built me. I began to write. Not to publish, not to share with anyone yet, but to let the words spill out of me. Every page was a confession, every sentence a battle cry against silence. And the more I wrote, the more I found clarity. What happened to me wasn't just about a cruel mother-in-law or a weak husband. It was about power, about control, about the way some people believe they can decide who matters and who doesn't. That's the heart of injustice, whether it's personal or racial or systemic. It's about erasing people, stripping them of dignity, pretending their suffering doesn't exist. And I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I started to tell my story out loud, to friends, to groups, to anyone willing to listen. At first, my voice shook, my hands trembled, but every time I spoke, the fear lessened and the fire grew. Because with every retelling, I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for anyone who had ever been silenced, for anyone who had been abandoned, discarded, or told they were nothing. Do you know what's strange? The more I shared, the less powerless I felt. I began to understand that survival wasn't just about living through that night or walking out of that ranch. Survival was about refusing to let the experience define me as broken. Survival was about turning pain into proof, turning scars into a voice that others could recognize. And yet, even as I healed, I carried questions that will never leave me. How could he? How could she? How could people who claim to be family turn cruelty into a weapon? Those questions may never have answers, and maybe they don't need answers anymore. Maybe the real power isn't in understanding why they did it, but in knowing that I'm still here despite it. Because in the end, this story isn't about them. It's about me. It's about survival. It's about the truth that no matter how hard someone tries to erase you, they can't take away your existence. I'm Alec Rose. I was abandoned, sick, and left to die in a forgotten ranch. But I lived, and I will not be silenced. And now, I want to leave you with this. How many others are still out there? Voices unheard, stories untold, lives erased in silence. How many more times will cruelty hide behind closed doors before we finally decide that every life matters, every voice deserves to be heard? I refuse to be forgotten. And if you hear my story, if it stays with you even for a moment, then I am proof that silence can be broken, that injustice can be named, and that survival is louder than cruelty will ever be. So I ask you, will you listen? Will you remember? Or will this just become another story the world tries to forget?